I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
When England declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, rationing soon began on other food and necessities. On January 8, 1940, bacon, butter, and sugar were rationed. This was followed by cheese, eggs, milk, meat, canned and dried fruit, cereals, teas, and jam. As the war progressed, rationing became stricter as more shortages occurred. The rationing continued until July 4, 1954, long after the war ended. After World War I and during the economic depression of the 1930s, Great Britain's economy moved from agriculture to industry. Before the war started, Great Britain imported 2/3 of its food. Having learned the hard way during World War I how important it was to have a steady supply of food for the troops and the general population, Great Britain did not want to be caught short when war seemed probable with Germany. Plans were put in place to start rationing at the outbreak of war. Food was stockpiled and rationed books printed.
It was Hitler's plan to starve Great Britain into submission. German U-boats cut off the supply of food coming from across the Atlantic. Great Britain's population was called upon to conserve and produce more food. Farming became a reserved occupation, which meant they were exempt from the draft. The Ministry of Agriculture put farms under strict control. Britain was asked to double their food production, and later they were asked for even more. Rationing was instituted in World War II as a way to make it fair for all. Winston Churchill was worried that the rich would buy out stores and hoard food.
Rationing will give everyone, rich and poor alike, an equal share of all that's going.
The ration was established to stop this from happening and to allow more food to be sent to the soldiers. The ration was also to make sure that no one would suffer from malnutrition. This was extremely important since citizens had to make weapons and grow food. The population needed to remain healthy to accomplish this. The Ministry of Food was set up as a way to control rationing. Headed by Lord Frederick Walton, the ministry made sure that everyone got their fair share. They set price ceilings on goods to stop stores from selling things at exorbitant prices that only the rich could afford. The ministry equalized food supplies through subsidies and items consumed by the poor and working class, such as bread, flour, oatmeal, meat, potatoes, milk, and eggs. Every person in Britain was issued a ration book. The information for the book, such as name and address, was filled out, and then the book was brought to the store to be registered. It was recommended that you kept your ration book with you at all times. The ration amounts to what was rationed varied throughout the war. A weekly ration for one person in 1939 consisted of 8 ounces of bacon or ham, 16 ounces of sugar, 4 ounces of loose tea, 8 ounces of cheese, 1 pound of fruit preserved per month, 6 ounces of lard, butter, and margarine, 2 ounces of sweet, 1 pint of milk, and 1 egg. Vegetables were not rationed. The Ministry of Agriculture encouraged people to grow as many as possible. The British population was asked to use any available space to grow crops. This is called the Dig for Victory campaign. The British population was told to cultivate their lawns, parks, and cricket pitches. The moat around the Tower of London was even turned to vegetable production. Farmers across Britain were expected to increase their yield by 60%. Farmers were also asked to help grow a pig with their neighbors in a pig club. Pig club members brought all their food scraps that were not fit for human consumption to the person who was taking care of the pig. The scraps were boiled down into swill and given to the pig. Half of the pig was given to the government. The other half was given to the pig club. It was required by law to have a constable there when a pig was slaughtered to make sure that no one took too much meat. People were also encouraged to raise rabbits in their backyard. Rabbits were a fast-growing meat source that did not require much food. Rabbits multiply quickly. If you started with 2 rabbits, you could end up with 20 rabbits by the end of the year. Because most able-bodied men had been conscripted, the Women's Land Army was formed. The land girls, as they were informally called, came from all across the country and became farmhands. The land girls were not actually employed by the government, but by the individual farmers. Many farmers thought that the land girls would not be able to do the same labor as a man, but soon learned they could. The girls who joined the land army were influenced by the glamorous advertising. Only a small number of land girls came from the country. Most came from the towns and cities. The town girls had no idea what the rural life might entail. The Ministry of Food and Lord Woolton launched a campaign with the characters Dr. Carrot and Potato Pete to make vegetables more appealing to children. They also published booklets giving information on topics such as how to grow vegetables and how to preserve and prepare food. They also urged people to eat bread, which is not rationed and had added vitamins and nutrients. This was called the National Loaf and was not popular because it was whole wheat bread. The National Loaf was also sold a day after it was baked, so a person could slice it thinner, thereby not consuming as much.
When there was war, there was always someone trying to make a profit from it. The black market thrived during World War II. The people associated with the black market were commonly called spivs by the citizens. Spivs were usually good friends with the store owners and often had access to extra goods. Selling on the black market was of course illegal. If they were caught with sufficient evidence, they would be fined. Later in the war, it could even be considered treason. The drudgery of rations, and the longer the war lasted, made the black market popular with citizens. This was one challenge to rationing that the British government encountered. British restaurants were a public, non-profit organization started by Lord Woolton. All the cooking was done by volunteers organized by a paid supervisor. Meals could be bought for an inexpensive price without a ration book. It was demanded that any factory with over 250 workers started an industrial canteen. The government also strongly encouraged factories with less than 250 workers to establish canteens as well. The canteens were a way to make sure that people who were doing vital or strenuous jobs would not develop health problems because of a bad diet. The canteens controlled rations to make sure that each person got the exact amount of nutrients they needed. These canteens helped the war effort by making sure vital products were not affected by the absences that stemmed from dietary problems. During World War II, the government asked housewives to set up feeding stations. The feeding stations would be run by the government and staffed by volunteers. To get the food needed to feed people, the government issued special subsidies for the stations for important rations that the population needed. Most of the people who came to the feeding stations had been displaced by bombing and had nowhere to eat. This provided a place where people who had lost their goods or ration books could come to eat without ration coupons. Schools also provided school lunches, which were popular. They provided food for school children that stretched the ration. 1,850,000 school meals were served by the end of the war. Radio broadcasts were an effective way to get information to the population. During the war, the Ministry of Food had several radio programs designed to help the housewife. One of the most popular ones was The Kitchen Front. Another program was The Radio Doctor, which gave helpful tips on how to stay healthy and how to eat and grow food for good nutrition. Lord Woolton often spoke on the radio to encourage people to be happy with their rations and to not waste food. People caught wasting food could be fined or put in prison.
Before the war, people in Britain had all they could eat. But when war struck and rationing was started, they were forced to find new ways to conserve and produce food. Under rationing, adults were able to stay fit and children were able to grow strong and healthy. This fact became apparent in the statistics of the time during the war. The infant mortality rate dropped, and the overall population had many less health problems. Because the British people won the battle at home to conserve and produce food, they were able to win the war in spite of the many challenges they encountered.